हेलो स्टूडेंट्स, टुडे विल बी डिस्कस अबाउट साइकोलॉजिकल नॉवेल। ओके, आज का हमारा टॉपिक क्या है? साइकोलॉजिकल नॉवेल। चलिए स्टार्ट करते हैं। साइकोलॉजिकल नॉवेल होता क्या है? अ साइकोलॉजिकल नॉवेल ऑल्सो कॉल्ड साइकोलॉजिकल रियलिज्म। ओके, साइकोलॉजिकल नॉवेल को साइकोलॉजिकल रियलिज्म कहा जाता है। इज अ वर्क ऑफ प्रोज फिक्शन। ये एक प्रोज फिक्शन का वर्क है विच प्लेसेज more than the usual amount of emphasis on interior characterization and on the motives, circumstances, and internal action, which springs from and develops external actions. The psychological novel is not content to state what happens but goes on to explain the motivation of this action. Psychological novel is a literary genre that emphasizes interior characterization as well as the motives, circumstances, and internal action, which is derivative from and create external actions, not content to state what happens, what rather reveals, studies the motivation behind the action. In this type of writing, character and characterization are more than usually important, and they often delve deeper into his mind of a character than novels of other genres. The psychological novel can be called a novel of the inner man, so to say. In some cases, the stream of consciousness technique as well as interior monologues may be employed to better illustrate the inner workings of the human mind at work. Flashbacks may also be featured. According to Oxford Dictionary, psychological novel is a type of novel in which the main interest lies in the mental and emotional aspects of the characters. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, a psychological novel work of fiction in which the thoughts, feelings, and motivations of the character are of equal or greater interest than is the external action of the narrative. The period 1900 to 1950 witnessed a great change in the novel, and a variety of many and different kinds of novel emerged within this period. Before the rise of the psychological novel, there used to be the traditional novel in which the writer told his stories for their own sake, keeping himself and his ideas out of them, and drawing his characters mainly from the outside, clearly seen figures in a clearly observed world. However, writers like Richardson and Fielding involved their own philosophy of life to their novels. Dickens started using the novel as a tool for the reform of social evils in his society. The psychological novel is also called psychological realism. Psychological novels are known as stories of the inner person. ओके, ये इनर पर्सन की स्टोरी के रूप में भी जाने जाते हैं। Psychoanalysis began to appear with the late Victorian writers. With the late Victorian period, psychological analysis began to appear in novels like that of Henry James. James focused on the motives and psychology of his characters rather than their actions. This depended on the reader's part in the novel. The reader not reads the novel but also analyzes the characters. Psychological novel co-evolved with psychoanalysis fired off in the first half of 1900s. Henry James was one of the first to focus on the motives and psychology of his characters rather than on their actions. Both the French and Russian novels influenced the English novel to a great extent. There was an attack on the traditional English novel. By the 19th, George Murray and Somerset Maugham were greatly influenced by the French novel. As Collinus puts it, French influence meant in part an aggressively frank realism, but more important, it meant greater attention to structure and expression. English novels were influenced by French, Russian novels. Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were especially influential. Stream of consciousness is one of the distinguishing features of a psychological novel. The term stream of consciousness was coined by the American philosopher and psychologist William James. The Russian novel, however, had a much more and deeper impact on the traditional English novel after the publication of the translation of great writers such as Tolstoy. The Russian novel stressed the importance of the inner self and the subconscious, as Collinus mentioned in his book. By the work of the Russian masters, it was possible to realize how much more deeply one could penetrate into the human soul. The tale of Genji, written in 11th century Japan, has often been considered the first psychological novel. In the West, the origins of the psychological novel can be traced as far back as Giovanni Boccaccio, 1344, Elegia di Madonna Flamita, that is before the term psychology was coined. Then English novelists had so far attempted mainly felt that in comparison with such work the English novel appeared provincial and soulless, half blinded to the psychological wonders of human personality. The influence of the Russian novel came to a head in time to join the forces with the psychology of the subconscious mind. The times was ripe for an attempt to revolutionary the English novel. The first rise of the psychological novel is a genre said to have started with the sentimental novel of which Samuel Richardson Pamela is a prime example. Psychological thriller. It is a subgenre of the thriller and psychological novel genres, emphasizing the inner mind and mentality of characters in a creative work. It bears similarities to the Gothic and detective fiction genres. Next है psychological horror. It is a subgenre of the horror and the psychological genres, which psychological, emotionally, and mentally relies on the state of characters to generate horror. Psychological drama. It is a subgenre of the drama and psychological novel genre, which focus upon the emotional, mental, and psychological development of characters in a dramatic work. Characteristics of psychological novel. Characters and characterization are prominent after delving deeper into characters' mentalities than other genres. Psychological novels are known as stories of inner person. Same stories employ stream of consciousness, interior monologues, and flashbacks to illustrate character mentalities. In the psychological novel, plot is subordinate to and dependent upon the probing delineation of character. Events may not be presented in chronological order but rather as they occur in the character's thought, association, memories, fantasies, reveries, contemplations, and dreams. The Russian novel, however, had a much more and deeper impact on the traditional English novel after the publication of the translation of great writers such as Tolstoy. In literature, psychological fiction, also psychological realism, is a narrative genre that emphasizes interior characterization and motivation to explore the spiritual, emotional, mental lives of character. The mode of narration examines the reasons for the behaviors of the character which propel the plot and explain the story. Psychological realism is achieved with the deep exploration and explanations of the mental states of the characters in a person, usually through narrative modes such as stream of consciousness and flashbacks. The psychological novel has a rich past in the 17th and 18th century works of Abbe Prevost, Samuel Richardson, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and many others, but it goes on being disinvented by ideologies and reinvented by their opponents because the subtleties of psychology defy most ideologies. The first rise of psychological novel as a genre is said to have started with the sentimental novel, of which Samuel Richardson's Pamela is a prime example. In French literature, Stendhal's The Red and the Black, The Princes of Cleves are considered early of the psychological novel. The modern psychological novel originated, according to Encyclopedia of the Novel, primarily in the works of novel laureate. In particular, Hunger, Mysteries, Pen, and Victoria. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching.